Welcome to the Empath X community call. I'm Jeremy. Glad to be here with the tribe, with the fam. I am really just chuffed is the word that comes to mind that we get to join in community without conditions, that we invite everyone to bring what is uniquely theirs to offer. If you'd like, you can go to empathx.org where you can find an archive, you can find a schedule, you can make a contribution, you can join a Facebook group, all sorts of good stuff over there. In the meantime, we are glad to be here weekly every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern and have a little teaching piece and then drop off the recording and have some beautiful conversation and drop into community. So this week we have our wonderful Karen here to teach us about the three choices for each line we write.
Yes.
Welcome,
This
Karen.
is, thank you. This is something that my late husband, the great writing teacher Sid Steeble, used to teach. And he used to attribute it to Aristotle. He used to say Aristotle says you have three choices for every line that you write. So when I was preparing to give this talk, I thought I ought to check that out and see if it's really, if it's really Aristotle, because sometimes he made stuff up. Um, I could not confirm that what I'm about to impart has the Aristotle seal of approval, but I can say that it's good advice and it's a tool that's helped me many times. So this is a way to edit your work and it's meant for later in the process. Do not try to do this when you are generating ideas or first drafting or second drafting because it's like a different part of your brain. You know what I mean? You don't, it's quite analytical and you don't want to get into this mindset with a piece that's still in the larval stage because you'll just squash your own creativity. But once you get pretty much down the line and you think, I think I'm pretty finished with this. This is a test that you can apply to see whether you need to cut. So for every line in your piece, it should do one of three things. And if it doesn't, cut, yeet, get rid of it. And the three choices are create atmosphere, define character, or advance the story. Three choices.
Mm.
Um, so we're going to look at each one of those in a little bit more in depth. Create atmosphere. Hemingway famously said, "Remember to get the damn weather in your book." Um, Atmosphere can be weather. Atmosphere tells us how to feel about the story or about the scene that we're in, right? Weather is a way to do that. It was a dark and stormy night. Evokes a certain type of feeling as opposed to, bright and sunny and the birds are chirping and all of that kind of stuff. Um, it can be, you know, uh, geography, Cathy and Heathcliff on the moors, right? Invokes drama, darkness, danger. It can be the psychological atmosphere. You can cut the tension with a knife, right?
Mm.
That tells us about what's going on in the scene psychologically, the atmosphere that the characters are moving through. Um, it can be uh, a description of imagine describing a home of the mother on the street where you grew up, where all the kids came and hung out and raided the refrigerator and the chaos and the warmth that's there. It can also be history. History can be atmosphere. Imagine a family story where genetics or environment is destiny. Um, think about an artist born into a family of lawyers. You set up the atmosphere of a family where everybody as far back as anybody can remember has been a lawyer or a judge or a jurist or something, and they talk about tort reform at the dinner table, and then you see this kid with his guitar.
Mm. Mm.
So that's some different ways that you can create atmosphere. Second choice is define character. You can describe your character physically or personality wise. She was the sort of person who prized order above all else.
Mm.
Um, she wouldn't even go to the mailbox without a full face of makeup. That's a description of the character. He'd never pass up an offer of food in his life, even when he wasn't hungry. He was 6'4" in the 11th grade, but lacked the grace and a killer instinct, much to the coach's dismay.
Hmm.
Well, we also learn about characters by what they do, um, particularly how they treat others. Ever been out to a restaurant with somebody who treated the wait staff poorly? And what did that make you think about their character?
Mhm.
What about someone who's kind to animals? How do we feel about that character? Barnaby Conrad, who was one of the founders of the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, used to talk about kick the dog westerns. You always knew who was the bad guy and who was the good guy in a western because the good guy would ride into town and the first thing he would do is water his horse before he went into the saloon and got a drink for himself.
Mm.
The bad guy would ride into town, get off his horse, and kick the dog on his way into the saloon.
Mhm.
So what they do is, and how they treat others is a way to define character. What about their dialogue, the way they talk? What's that supposed to mean? As opposed to, I hate to ask, but please, if it's not too much trouble and when you get a chance, could you get off my foot? Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
the last choice is advance the story. And this is mostly what I've talked about in my previous talks about writing. You know, we've talked about that step outline. We've talked about write a sentence for any time something happens. Basically, advancing the story is something happened. A shot rang out. Uh, the hurricane edged closer to the shore. She said yes. It could also be somebody deciding to do something, deciding, making a decision. That's something happening. If they decide A, the story goes this way. If they decide B, the story goes that way. Um, so you remember that step outline? You write a sentence for every time something happens. That's what advancing the story is. And people have a lot of confusion about this. They don't know what's story and what's incidental. Well, a man eating a sandwich is probably not advancing the story unless he gets food poisoning and misses his flight,
Mm.
which then goes down over the ocean. And now he has a choice to make. He can either go back to his old life or he can assume a new identity and pretend he made it onto the plane. But typically speaking, the mundane details of everyday life are not advancing the story. They may be creating atmosphere, they may be defining character, so you're still on solid ground. Um, every three work, every work will use these three things in different proportions, and in a longer work, you'll be heavier on one than the other. Some writers tend to be atmosphere heavy. Some, like Elmore Leonard, are story heavy. Elmore Leonard says, "I leave out the parts people skip." Um,
Hmm.
ultimately, what you do what feels right to the story. And usually that's a balance. You don't want to be going on for pages and pages and pages of atmosphere, 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 because no matter how well you write, eventually the reader is going to say, when is something going to happen?
Mhm.
So you go through your manuscript and you take out everything that doesn't do one of these three things. And what you're left with is something that is much tighter. Um, it's going to move better. It's going to be more appealing to your reader on every level. Um, because if it's not doing one of these three things, why is it there? What is it doing besides showing off your masterful literary skills? You know, Elmore Leonard, I leave out the parts people skip. People don't care. They really don't care how well you write.
Hmm.
I mean, some writers do. I find it's mostly writers who read for like style and
Yeah.
things like that. I think that's mostly instructive to
Mhm.
us. I think people tend to enjoy things with a good story and things that are things that are meaningful. They want to be touched. They
Hmm.
want to be moved.
Hmm.
They
Mm.
want to be entertained.
Hmm.
So this is a way to make sure that you're doing that and not just talking to yourself.
Hmm.
Mhm.
that that's going to help a lot in our in our book writing process.
Yep.
That's real helpful.
Hmm.
Yep.
I love the simplicity of those, like the way to break it down of like make sure I'm accomplishing something because I know oftentimes in seeking to try to define my feelings or put things together, like it's just so many words. Not wrong, not bad, but when it comes down to like hearing myself saying something that rings so true and like the surrender when I was like, boy, I've never said it that way, or I haven't told that story in a long time, right? These sort of
Yeah.
like you said, the meaning behind it,
Hmm.
like there's the drivel and dross that you can feel is like I'm just saying words just to say words. Like let me just stop, and then like oh,
Hmm.
it dawns on me in the middle of all this rain of just mud, like oh my gosh, and like that I didn't realize that this atmosphere, this setting, I never thought about it that way. Or if I hadn't gone through that, I now see that I have this beautiful gift that's come out of it. Or
Right, right.
the like you were talking about, the moving the story along, so create a writing something or making something happen. I love JJ Abrams talking about that. With Have you heard about him talking about his mystery box?
No.
So JJ, obviously he's a writer, he's not a writer, he's a director.
Hmm.
But he I heard him do this interview and talk about this when the Lost series was out, which I love that series, even though the ending does certainly leave more to be wanted.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, he talks about in this box of mystery his grandfather got for him when he was a little kid. And inside of it, it was like this idea of kind of like what you're saying is like, who knows what's going to happen next? Like, but every time you open the box, it opens up three other boxes. Is the surprise box of JJ Abrams' surprise box that his grandpa gave him. And
That's cool. What a
so
great gift
you
for a
see
kid.
in a lot of the directional stuff that JJ Abrams directs, every
Hmm.
time one thing resolves, it splits into two or three or four other things to be resolved. So it's this like ongoing thing that just keeps going. But
Hmm.
yeah, that's what came up for me when you were sharing all that. Brian, I
That's
see you're trying to share, but you're muted, my
all
friend.
right. Thank you. I was just going to say, I love all your examples. Like some of this stuff can get really abstract, but when you give two or three one sentence examples of this is what this would sound like, it's like, oh,
Yeah,
okay, I get it.
yeah,
It
Hmm.
just, it grounds it.
yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
Agreed.
you're welcome. And it is sometimes hard to do with your own work because maybe what you had in mind when you wrote that line was to do one of these three things. You have to be a little bit analytical and dispassionate about it and going, am I really being successful here?
Mm,
Sometimes you're not doing what you think you're doing. And that's where also, an outside reader can come in handy. Make sure it's somebody who you really trust and reads a lot
Mm.
and maybe writes themselves and has some of the same ideas about writing that you do because that can be a minefield. But that's what we do in my workshop is we read aloud and we have the people who are in the workshop feedback what they hear, and that's how the writer knows
mm,
whether or not they're communicating what they think they're communicating.
that's great.
Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. And
Mm.
sometimes they're communicating something they didn't know they were communicating
Yeah,
Mm.
because that subconscious thing is in operation. And I've seen it that people get something out of the material that the writer didn't think was there. And it's like, look, four or five people in this room heard the same thing. Maybe you need to look at
yeah.
what you're really doing here. This could be a deeper, richer story than what you think you've got.
Karen, have you ever had any experience with NVC, nonviolent communication? Brian, I'm sure you
No,
have.
I usually communicate very violently as much as possible.
For sure. But it's like a
Marshall Rosenberg.
yeah, it's a guy that created this mechanism, this practice, right? It's a whole thing, and the people that follow it religiously get real culty, just like anything that's worth anything. Um, but I think as a tool, as a practice, it's a good concept. And what you're saying there just kind of made me think of that in this sense of the way that they embody just basic good communications. What you're saying, like somebody says something and everyone else repeats back what they've heard. It's the basic sin, but we don't do that.
Yeah.
we're so
No.
busy interrupting each other with the thing
Mm.
that I want to say because I got triggered on this thing. I'm barely listening to you, rather than like, oh, you're going to state a thing, I'm going to restate a thing, and then you're going to clarify the thing. Anything that I might have misconceived or anything that comes up for you, you might want to add to it. Make sure that I hear, and then it becomes this exhaustive, but also really deep and meaning, like clarity, right? That space of like, let's make sure
Yeah.
our words are very
For the
direct.
speaker and the listener.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that feedback mechanism.
Hmm.
I
Interesting.
remember that being not NVC, but that just simple communication being like the first time I heard it in my master's degree class. Like no one, I had not been exposed to good communication before I graduated.
Any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, right, right. Says a lot about my experience of being human.